Hello and welcome to my channel. I am Critter XD. I do Wheel of Time content, especially lately because the show has just dropped. We've got episodes 1 through 3, which I really loved overall, to go over. And you know what? I'm not gonna do a moment by moment breakdown because, well, that sounds like a lot. And I want to focus on the controversial topics. I'm gonna give you some hot takes today. And if you like what you see, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the little bell so you know when I post things, and stick around because there's going to be more where that came from. Let's talk about Perrin first, because that's arguably the biggest, most intense change from the books. In the books, Perrin did not have a wife at first. He was a single 19-year-old boy, innocent as the rest of them, and there was a running joke about how each one of the main boys, Rand, Matt, and Perrin, knew how to talk to girls where the other ones didn't, even though really they're all pretty good with girls, let's be honest. So, Perrin having a wife changes that dynamic a little bit. We saw, though, that Perrin didn't have a wife for very long, and that is somewhat problematic for some people because it falls into the stereotype of the trope called fridging. Fridging being when a loved one is hurt, killed, maimed, assaulted, or otherwise traumatized in order to motivate another character or move their plot forward. I think in this situation, this is pretty much definitely fridging because in the books, Perrin always struggles with his animalistic side versus his more human side. His bloodthirsty side, his side that's incredible at battle, and the side that is reluctant to act rashly or go with any violence, essentially. He's very anti-violence. He tries not to be violent when he can. So this is clearly going to be the motivator for that, and I think it's a really good shortcut to that because in the books, Perrin is very internal, and you don't get an internal dialogue in a show. So now book readers and show watchers alike will understand why Perrin is so reluctant to act violently. So this is good for that, but it does count as fridging. I'm not as worried about it in this specific situation, though, because we have a lot of very strong female characters. Oftentimes, fridging is used, to use a Wheel of Time term, to burn a female thread out of an otherwise male-dominated pattern, leaving mainly male threads to be the force for the story going forward. This is a problem because there are a lot of properties that don't have good female representation. The Wheel of Time is not one of those properties. Right now, Rosamund Pike as Moiraine is the lead. We've got Egwene and Nynaeve as well, very, very strong female characters, and even though they're not necessarily good guys, we've got the other Aes Sedai too. Liandrin we've seen, incredibly powerful. So I think it's the fridging, even though it's there for sure, in this situation, it's forgivable. There's also an interesting theory that would make the fridging extremely forgivable, and that is if Layla Ibarra was a dark friend. There's a little bit of evidence to go towards the dark friend theory, and let's get into it. So basically, whenever Perrin was beating down that Trolloc in a frenzy, clearly, he turns around, hearing something behind him, and strikes with an axe Layla on accident. But Layla was swinging her hammer at we're not sure because there weren't any more living Trollocs in the room. So here we have Layla seemingly swinging in Perrin's direction without any living Trollocs. To me, that says there's a non-zero chance that she's a dark friend. People have pointed out to me that later on in another episode, a wolf is eating Layla's entrails in Perrin's dreams, and we all know wolves, well, we don't all know wolves, but wolves seem to be good guys at this point. So the fact that the wolf was kind of against her is another sign that perhaps she was on the side of the bad rather than the good. I kind of think that could also be explained by whoever's creating these dream situations for Perrin, trying to mess with him, and what worse imagery than that, but I guess time can only tell. I want to hear what you think about the Perrin, Layla, dark friend, fridging situation. I want to hear your opinions on it in the comments. Next, I want to talk about another huge change, which is the relationship between Rand and Egwene. I say huge, it's not really that huge. In the books, Rand and Egwene had a very sweet, childish, crush situation on each other. Rand knew that Egwene was probably the woman he was going to marry eventually, but they hadn't really kissed. Nothing had happened between them. He was about 19, she was like 16 or 17, and I'm gonna be honest. That seems very unrealistic to me. I get it that they were in a small town and it was, I don't know, a little more prudish, but I mean, come on, they're teenagers. They've got hormones. So I think that in the show, they have aged them both up to 20, and they clearly have a bit of a sexual relationship. I think that's better. I think that's an improvement on the books. I like it much better that way. That will also raise the stakes for their relationship going forward, and book readers know some of the stuff that goes down, which will be extra interesting because of this, I think. Yeah, I just want to take a second to tell the people who are arguing that Rand and Egwene have lost their innocence because of this, that these are still 20-year-old kids. They haven't lost their innocence. They're still basically college kids, like dancing around each other, hurting each other's feelings, and it still totally works. I'm excited about it. I also am very excited about the fact that it seems like the Wheel of Time is getting a little sexier, just generally. It's got a little bit of spice to it that it didn't have right away in the books. That being evidenced best by this scene in the very first episode where we got land butt, which was, it was great. Lots of people in my TikTok comments were concerned that it implied some kind of sexual relationship between Lan and Moraine. I would just like to remind you all that co-ed baths are very common in the Borderlands, and Lan is from the Borderlands, so that has nothing to do with sex. Also, it's not like anything happened between them in the tub. They just talked. And I think that was a perfect sign of how platonic their relationship really is. There's respect, there's humor, but there's no romance. There's really no romance. And this was the perfect way to show that while still being a little sexy. People are also very upset about the fact that our boy Matt Coffin seems to be a bit of a thief these days. I'm not super worried about this. Matt was always chaotic good. The things that he's doing are for his family. The Matt Coffin I know and love would do anything for the people that he loves, and that is exactly what we saw in these first 3 episodes. Did he loot a body? Yes, but he was trying to get money to get back to his sisters who don't have fitting parents to take care of them. Did he steal a bracelet? Yeah, he did, but he was trying to get money to spend with the peddler for lanterns and stuff like that. He was in poverty, and so I think that some of his actions were relatively excusable in the grand scheme of things because he had different economic circumstances than everybody else. Also, I think later in the books, Matt does a lot of morally ambiguous things with the advantages that he's been given that could be considered stealing. So is this our Matt? Yes. I also just want to give a shout out to Barney Harris. I think he's doing an incredible job, and the humor that Matt brings to the show is impeccable. It is so necessary, and I'm living for it. I just want to bring this up mainly because I want to show this photo, but also because I've seen people whine about the fact that Tom's not in the first episode. Tom's not in the Two Rivers. And all I have to say about that is, if we had to wait for episode 3 to see Tom, aren't you glad that this is the kind of introduction we got? Episode 1 was a rush. It was insane. We met a lot of people in that episode. I think it's nice that our boy Tom got his own episode. We got a big song introduction, which is perfect because he's the Gleeman. He's got a little more roguish of an attitude than he did in the books, which I think is refreshing and great because he's a little more unpredictable, but he's still the Tom we know and love. He's the knife-wielding, quick-witted, sharp, kind of fatherly figure to Matt and Rand, which is just lovely. I'm a big fan of this Tom, and I think it was totally worth the wait to see him in episode 3. I also want to give a shout out to the costume designers. I didn't want the patchy, fluttery cloak. I feel like that's mildly cartoonish. Same with the giant mustaches. A little bit cartoonish. I think the way they gave a nod to his multicolored cloak here is perfect. They lined the inside of the cloak with the patches. Well done. Well done. These guys. I actually asked Rafe in his AMA about how the White Cloaks managed to take down so many Aes Sedai when in the books they were more of a nuisance rather than an actual threat. And he hinted that they've got something going on. They've got something else going on that we're going to find out more in season 3, but also maybe a little bit more near the end of this season. So I guess we'll have to keep our eyes peeled on why the White Cloaks are managing to be such threats to the Aes Sedai. But he does have that in mind. It's not just nothing. I also just wanted to say that I do love the channeling. I feel like it's gorgeous, but if I had one complaint about it, I would just say that I loved the idea of like women standing still staring at each other. And I know that in the books that, they do the throwing motion to throw fireballs and whatnot. I know that movements are a part of channeling in the books, but there are certain weaves that don't require movements, that they don't move for. And I'm hoping we get more of that, because the extremely elaborate gestures, while gorgeous and fun to watch, they feel like they would take more time than I imagine channeling taking in the books. And I know that we need more exposition for a show than the books needed to give us. But basically all I want going forward at some point is whenever there are two women facing off channeling against each other, I want the perspective of someone who is not a channeler, like watching them both and not seeing any movement, just seeing them stare at each other. Because I know that scene was described in the books, and I always loved that. And so I want it to happen at some point in the show. Until then, we can get the fun movements, but I want it sometime. Also, I talked to somebody about this in my TikTok comments, but they were talking about how the weaves don't have color, and all I have to say about that is, why do they need color? I mean, they're still intricate. Basically, color was just a way to explain what was happening, but if we can see what's happening, I still think they're pretty. People are also worried that there might be a girl dragon reborn. At least that's how they're playing it up. And let me just say that Rafe kind of cleared something up in his AMA today. He said that the big change is that the Aes Sedai are not taking the prophecies as law because, they involve stuff 3,000 years in the past. It seems reasonable that things might have changed. They might have got some things wrong. And so her acknowledging that it might be a girl is just essentially her covering all of her bases. The story would be fundamentally different if the Dragon Reborn ended up being a woman. First of all, because then there wouldn't be the taint to deal with, and the dragon would just possibly be some awesome person with awesome power. No problems there, right? With a man, though, there are a lot of negative implications, which makes the story way more interesting. I'm pretty sure I hit all the high notes. If I didn't, please let me know in the comments. If you disagree with any of this, please let me know in the comments. I appreciate you all being here and listening to my perspective on the controversial topics from episodes 1 through 3, and I hope you come back for whatever I come up with for episode 4.